Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to FinSec. I'm really excited this morning because this is our first flagship event for 2021. But FinSec in itself is in year 3, and I'm really excited because in the past, we have received so many positive feedbacks about FinSec, specifically, the role that it has played in cybersecurity and privacy when it comes to the financial sector. So now the leaders in financial sectors in India, they think FinSec as the platform to share the knowledge among themselves, to bring everyone up and running when it comes to cybersecurity and privacy. So I'm really excited to kickstart FinSec 2021 in its third year. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know it's not a very easy year for all of us, but yes, the leaders in cybersecurity world, the leaders in banking sectors, they are ensuring that this year is very comfortable in terms of technology innovation, in terms of cybersecurity innovation and privacy innovation. Now, with that, FinSec 2021 has a powerful agenda in its arsenal. So we have a bunch of masterclasses. So we have 2 masterclasses today, and the one that you are attending right now is by Tenable. We have our plenaries, we have our inaugural keynotes, track sessions covering various topics from app modernization, from privacy, from cybersecurity, discussing India's role as an innovation hub, discussing the fraud landscape. So all these will be covered in next 2 days. So I really hope that you stick with us right from morning till evening. And I ensure you that whatever you hear, whatever you listen, there will be some kind of insights, some kind of helping hand that will be given to you to solve your business problems and take it forward. So with that, so today's masterclass is by Tenable. Like I said, we will be discussing the important thing is the keys that cybersecurity leaders need to understand to manage the cyber risk, especially in 2021. And as we all know, that 2020 and 2021 has been a little different year when it comes to cyber risk and the threat landscape. So we will be discussing that. Important point that Tenable team will help us to understand is that compliance is not everything when it comes to cybersecurity, right? So it is one of the key factors in your cybersecurity journey, in your transformation journey, but it is not the end of the story. So we will break this myth. Tenable team will help us to break this myth. So with this, without taking much time, I would like to welcome Mr. Shankar Sareen, who is the head of marketing India and SARC from Tenable, and Mr. Aftab Syed, who is the sales leader, BFSI, India and SARC. So Mr. Shankar and Mr. Aftab, welcome to the stage.
Hey, thank you, Suneet, and it's a pleasure. Thank you for having us, and wish everybody who's joining us a wonderful FinSec 2021.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, Aftab bhai. Good to see you, and glad that we would be hosting the Tenable Masterclass. I am not sure who's Shah Rukh Khan and who's Saif, but yeah, as FinFair awards are interesting, we would just ensure that DSCI FinSec Conclave 2021 is equally interesting. So Aftab, what do we have in store for Tenable Masterclass?
Yeah, so let me pick this up. Very nice to start with. Now, we all know managing cybersecurity risk, while it appears to be a business as usual process or a daily work-life dose, but we all know it's like picking up a rose petal from the bush of thorn. How about a cheat sheet or a booklet which can help us guide? Now, this can really help us, any our leader of cyber security space, and let them know how to do it. Now, our first topic on that, it'll help. It's like 3 keys of every security leader to successfully manage cyber risk in 2021. So, Shankar, why don't you introduce our first speaker and let everybody know who's that gentleman who's going to give us our first topic and speak about this success.
So in fact, Aftab bhai, why don't we just take the take the delegates audience who've joined up, and a big thank you to all of us, all of you who've joined us. Why don't you just take all of us through the way we've structured the entire masterclass, masterclass flow, and then I'll definitely introduce the first speaker and we'll get going.
Perfect. So the first topic, as I mentioned, it is three key for every security leader to successfully manage security risk in 2021. Then comes something about demystifying RBI policy. Now, digital age cannot conclude without digital payments, as you all know. It's an important page for every financial book life. Safe, assured, and secure transaction minus fraud or financial loss. This topic demystifies the RBI policy around digital payments, and the theme is compliance is not equal to security. And as we go forward, of course, you will introduce the respective speakers here. The next topic after that would come as 5 reasons to upgrade from Nessus Pro. Now, this is a very interesting topic, Shankar. Nessus Pro or Tenable, like which is an organization and which is a product. So I met to see a customer and he said that yes, there are guests at the reception from Nessus. So we were trying to understand that why it meant to be. Then I asked this customer. The customer was so much of in love with Nessus that he always mentioned Nessus and not Tenable. While everybody knows that Nessus Professional is a Tenable is one of the most favorite product, which is being loved by security industry since ages. With risk growing more and more around us, there was need for us to know where to focus. And any security leader should know how easily to communicate the security risk postures. So this topic is all about that. And hence, over a period of time, upgrading from Nessus Pro, the industry has been taking advantage of Tenable Enterprise platform. And this session is about all highlighting 5 reasons why one should upgrade from Nessus Professional to Tenable Enterprise products. Then would come a live demo session from our tech specialist, which is Zishan Patel. And the last but not the least would be a industry perspective from a practitioner, and the guest would appear as time comes. I would like to keep it as a surprise, or if you want to introduce, I'll Shankar. Go ahead, Shankar.
Perfect. Thank you, Aftab. And as Aftab has explained to all of you, this definitely to all my industry colleagues joining in. This is not your regular masterclass. We would try and ensure that in every session, in every minute, and every speaker, we are giving you something interesting, something which is relevant from the industry. And our humble request is that if you've got any questions, if you have any feedback to share, please use the chat option. Share your feedback, share your questions, and this as they say is definitely a two-way street. While our intent is to give you something very meaningful and something very interesting, as you would have seen, the flow is very insightful, is very engaging. We've got the best of speakers, my colleagues, as I will introduce them to you. There are folks who are joining in from Europe, and it's 4 a.m. their time. There are folks who are joining us from the West Coast. It's 9 p.m. their time. So to all my industry colleagues, a big thank you for joining us. And believe me when I say that we've actually put together a very compelling show for you. I know I wish we were all live in person. We could have met face to face, but with the things that we're currently in, we haven't taken the the compelling reason or the punch away. So while this is still a virtual event, we're all prepared. So the organizers, can we please have Adam joining us? We would just, while Adam is joining in, let me just introduce Adam to you. So guys, Adam is a senior colleague. He has over 22 years of working experience in cybersecurity. His experience includes, working with European banks, working with UN global programs. In fact, interestingly, he started his career with the US military officer focused on solving cybercrime cases. So with further ado, a quick check with the organizers. Can we have Adam up on the stage if Adam has joined in?
So, Shankar, sorry, because of some technical glitch, I think we have lost Adam for a
Adam?
bit. Yeah.
Sure.
So just give us 1 to 2 minutes and we are solving.
No problems. Let me also try and see if I can pull in Adam
Sure.
from my internal tab. Sure. Thank you, team, the DSCI team. This has been a wonderful support, live active support. So Adam should be joining in anytime.
So Shankar, meanwhile, it's important that we understand the virtual and the
Oh
actual
yes, oh
stage.
yes. In the
So
physical environment, yeah, Adam probably would be sitting on the first row, and we would have pulled him over.
yeah, I mean, has this been very quick coming Adam in on stage? It would have not been complete. So a slight delay is like something Adam is walking from the backstage to the That's
And
very
we can't true. We can't blame him. It's 4 a.m. his time, so no
I
matter how
know.
many cups of coffee he
Absolutely.
consumes, it's
Absolutely,
still
and I'm sure this delay is worthwhile, Shankar, because the content coming from Adam has always been praised by many. In fact, I met a couple of CISOs in my last discussion, and they were all trying to understand when is he coming and speaking. So we
sure.
again gave this feedback. So very nice. I'm sure this is going to be fruitful.
Wonderful. I've just got a SMS from Adam. He's saying he's just logging back in. He had to restart his machine, apparently owing to some technical glitch, as Sunit mentioned. So I
Sure.
think, folks, just give us a couple of more minutes. In the meanwhile, let me reintroduce Adam. Adam's been an expert more than 22 years in cybersecurity space. His experience includes executive engagements with large cybersecurity vendors, leading UN global programs against cybercrime. He was recently, just before joining Tenable, he was a global director for IT and cyber risk at one of the largest European banks. And, with Adam's diverse background and actually engaging and doing so many events, doing so many shows, engagements with CISOs, his experience definitely would be something that all of us would value from. Um, and I am sorry, this definitely is a technical glitch. Adam
Take a
should
little
be
more, take a little longer than required, but then
Yeah, he's just pinged me on Slack saying that give me 2 more minutes, please. I'm restarting my machine.
no worries.
In the meanwhile, Sunit, just checking if there are any questions, anything that from the audience that we could take.
Yeah, so I think we should, gather questions and if it is appropriate, we'll answer. We'll get back. But definitely, the whole intent is that after this session completely, customers, audiences will be really happy to hear. And if anybody has any question on in person, they can reach us to for our
Sure.
second line of thinking.
Perfect. We've got Adam just joining in, and we've got one question coming in that I'm just about to read. Okay, so we've got the question saying, can you please put up the slide agenda, the flow of the workshop again? It was interesting to see. So
That's
with
nice.
that, yeah, thank you for the question. We're just sharing the flow again. So again, a rundown. Um, we would start with a session with Adam. He's our cyber security strategist, and he would talk about the 3 keys for every cyber security leader to successfully manage cyber risk in 2021. Following him, we would have compliance is not equal to security. An expert from one of the leading and firm PwC, Amol, sharing his bit and demystifying the RBI's new policy on digital payments. We would then move to Jeff Abood, He'll give you reasons to upgrade from Nessus Pro to the Tenable Enterprise platform. Following that would be a live demo. And then we would move to an interesting session with one of the leading industry CISOs, getting a very close, up and personal interaction with him and taking his perspective. So with that, Adam, thank you for joining in and glad to have you. The stage is all yours, Adam.
Thank you. I will share my screen. One moment. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Palmer, and I am the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist for Tenable. For those of you not familiar with Tenable, Tenable is a 20-year-old publicly listed company. Headquarters is in the United States, but we have offices across the world. I am based in Dublin, Ireland, and we are also publicly listed on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange and regularly recognized as the #1 company in risk-based vulnerability management. I'm going to be talking to you about 3 keys that security leaders should utilize to achieve success in their security program this year in 2021 and beyond. For background, I have 20 years of experience. I am a former CISO, and so I have sat in operational roles, and most recently I worked at one of the largest banks in the European Union as a global cyber risk director. So the 3 keys that I'm going to focus on are what we say are the ability to see all of your assets, predict what are your critical risks, and then act effectively to address those risks. But first, let's talk for a minute about what is the problem. What is the problem? In a recent study conducted by Tenable, or by Forrester, rather, consulting on behalf of Tenable, we found that there are 3 core problems that were identified across security leaders around the world. Only about 50% of security leaders say that their organization has good visibility into the state of security of their most critical assets. And you can only protect what you can see. So this is a significant problem if there's limited visibility. Also, we saw that many security leaders, that over half of security leaders lack the confidence that they have the technology or the processes to accurately predict cybersecurity threats. So there's a challenge and a difficulty among security leaders to really know and understand what are their critical risks and to adequately prepare their organization for that. There's also a disconnect. Security leaders are disconnected from the business. Only about 45% of security leaders reported that they regularly review their security organization's performance metrics with business stakeholders. And one of the most important, I think, missions of a security leader should be aligned with the business. You should be making sure that your security program is not in a silo or a vacuum, but that you are supporting and driving the business forward. So let's talk about in the next few minutes how you can fix these problems. If you fall into one of these categories, how can you focus on awareness of that problem, and also what is the solution and actions that you take to be a better security leader this year? So let's look at the starting point, which is where a lot of security organizations are, which is the need to see everything. The Forrester study that was consulted found that effective business-aligned security leaders are 3 times more likely than their siloed counterparts to have a holistic understanding of their organization's entire attack surface. This goes back to my comment that I just made, that the most important step is first to see what you have. You can only protect what you can see. So understanding what assets are within your organization is that critical first step. Now let's look for a second at the attack surface for cybersecurity. If I had to confess to you and be completely honest, I focused in my prior operational roles on those bottom layer traditional IT assets. These are the servers, the laptops, the desktop machines that you are probably all familiar with. And this is where many security leaders sometimes stop their visibility of their organization. But now I talk to a lot of CISOs and security professionals who are moving into the cloud. They're looking at container, they're looking at cloud-based assets. So this is really becoming an increased focus. And I also want to mention, and I'll talk about it for a few minutes later, operational technology, or OT. This is also a really critical area that I think is a blind spot for a lot of security professionals. Now, of course, you may be thinking this only applies to manufacturing or heavy industry, but think about all the smart connected access controls in your environment or the connected HVAC devices that you might have. Many of these devices are connected into your network, and they're accessed by third parties. They have confidential data on them. And I think this is an area that I really see as a blind spot. And we see attackers targeting this. And of course, once they can target this area as a weak spot, they can move laterally into your other areas of your network. So I want to mention that as, one example in all of these of the expanding cyber exposure gap and the expanding threat attack surface. And the real problem is that legacy vulnerability management solutions that many security leaders are trying to use have limited visibility into all of these assets across these different platforms. There's also not effective prioritization, and I'll talk a little more about that later. And of course, if you can't see what you have and you don't understand the risks, there's very poor communication across the business. So we see this problem that their legacy vulnerability management approaches, older approaches, just can't handle this modern attack surface across all of these different assets. And I'll give you an example of this. I talk to many security leaders who will say that they focus on CVSS scores, critical or high CVSS scores. But almost 60% of critical or of CVSS scores, these are common vulnerability scoring system, almost 60% of these scores are critical or high. So if you're focused on critical or high, let's give an example. If you have 100,000 vulnerabilities, almost 60,000 of those are going to be critical or high. So this is not effective prioritization. It's not seeing your environment effectively. Also, the CVSS scores often don't have a context. They aren't related to your environment. They can be sometimes be old and lacking really a connection to what you should prioritize on. So, we're going to talk here a little more about prioritization, but this just kind of shows how that's not an effective way to see your environment, not an effective way to prioritize. And if you follow this type of approach, you're going to be chasing 60,000 or more vulnerabilities and not really focusing on what's the most important risks to your organization. So the fundamental problem is a data problem. Regardless of the size of your organization or your security team, and we know many of us have fewer resources than ever, but regardless of the size, you will never have enough resources to remediate every vulnerability across your attack surface if you don't see everything and prioritize effectively. And as I mentioned, you have these critical new risks like OT and IT convergence, where if you're heavy manufacturing, or even if you're not, if you're just a company that's using connected OT devices like access controls and HVAC devices as examples in your network, we see this is the preferred method now for attackers to find these blind spots and move laterally into your IT network, or vice versa, use your IT network to move in and cause harm into serious production facilities or manufacturing facilities that you might be using. And if you're thinking about financial services, this could really relates to like an ATM network. Or think about the bank that I worked at had massive facilities for cooling and data server management facilities that you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of as manufacturing, but these were definitely heavy industrial type devices that were being used in our environment to preserve the IT network, to monitor the environment of that network. And I think that we were just focused on the IT network primarily, but we really need to focus holistically on all of those OT devices. Because there's really no visibility into those networks. It's often outdated equipment, undocumented protocols, and you have invisible assets. So that's enough about OT. For a second, I want to talk, though, also about cloud, since so many security leaders are focused on cloud. And as I mentioned, this is another area where there's a lack of visibility, the lack of ability to see everything inside your cloud environment. When we look at traditional IT approaches versus cloud-focused security solutions like Tenable offers, one of the problems, again, is that cloud service providers or the cloud access security brokers, the CASBs that you might be using, focus primarily on configuration management. But you really also need to focus on the vulnerabilities and don't rely solely on a third party. Regardless of what platform you're using, don't rely solely on a third party is going to manage all the security in the cloud for you. As an organization, you really need to monitor this yourself and make sure that you're not only managing the configuration controls, which is definitely a big part of security, but also scanning for vulnerabilities across your cloud-based assets. And you also want to make sure that you have a holistic view, as we mentioned, so that you're integrating that vision of your assets and risks in the cloud, along with your other risks in your traditional IT assets outside the cloud, so you can get a whole picture of what your environment is and not in a silo. So if you look at some of the traditional VM solutions, they just, again, lack the ability to really discover and assess cloud assets for vulnerabilities. They're focused on configuration controls. Sometimes they're focused only on post-deployment remediation, and they can be very siloed, focusing only on those cloud-based assets. Also, Tenable provides within our cloud-based solutions, we provide the ability to benchmark against your peers and also using machine learning and threat intelligence to help you get a full picture of the risk. So when you don't have good visibility of your assets, you get a false sense of security based on incomplete data. You often will end up, I see a lot of organizations that have easily exploitable vulnerabilities available to attackers, and you waste a lot of time and effort addressing low risk issues that ultimately creates an inability for you to effectively communicate risk about your program back to the business. So what is the solution to this? The answer is using a risk-based approach to cybersecurity management, as Tenable provides. In fact, in a study by McKinsey Consulting, and of course, McKinsey is one of the most respected organizations for cybersecurity risk, they did a study and found that companies that have adopted a risk-based approach have almost an 8 times improved security program at no added cost. But that seems unbelievable. How can you achieve that? The reason is if you follow a risk-based approach and you see everything and you focus on the critical risks, you avoid wasting time and resources on the wrong things. So you improve your security at actually a lower cost. So that's really the solution. And we'll talk a little more about how to do that. But the idea is that by following this approach, you can focus on that 3% of vulnerabilities that are really the most critical. And it's like I was talking to a CISO for a large healthcare provider a couple months ago, and he said that when they started using this approach of a real risk-based Tenable supported approach, at first they thought they had much more work because they were seeing many more assets in their environment. But this was good because for the first time they saw everything that they had to protect. But then he realized that actually he had better security and less work because he was only focused on that 3 to 5% of vulnerabilities that were a key priority. So this kind of is a good way to transition to our next topic, which I said is predicting what matters. And we've kind of already touched on this, but business aligned security leaders that are 7 times more likely to automate the application of business risk management objectives to vulnerability prioritization practices. They have the ability to predict what matters and automate that so that they're not only seeing their environment, but they can predict what are the critical risks. So let me give you an example of an approach that I see many organizations take that fails. And for all honesty, this is an approach that I saw in every organization that I worked at on some level. And it looks something like this. It's often called the RAG score, or the red, amber, green approach to security management. So you identify a generic problem like access management, a generic risk, and you label it red in the first quarter. You deploy a technical control. Say in July, you label that amber or yellow. And then at the end of the year, you fully deploy that control and you label it green. Now, why does this fail? It fails because you're not truly measuring the risk or the risk reduction. You've only measured the deployment of a technical control. You haven't even really identified whether or not the risk that you are focused on is the most critical risk for your organization. So what you really want to focus on is, have you identified a critical risk? And is that technical control actually reducing the risk? Or are you merely measuring the deployment of a control? So how can you do this? Tenable believes there's two pillars to an effective risk-based vulnerability management program that helps you see and predict what are the key risks. And the first pillar is the VPR, the Vulnerability Priority Rating. The Vulnerability Priority Rating is the idea that you want to have a deep understanding of that vulnerability that could harm your organization. So you calculate the priority of the vulnerability based on the actual threat that it poses by looking at the recency of the threat, the intensity of it, how is it exploiting assets in your environment or assets out in the wild? What's the age of that vulnerability? Is this something that's recent, or has it been known for a long time? And what is the threat source? Is this a nation state attack, or is this a cyber criminal gang? They can have very different motivations, but combining all those factors gives you a deep understanding of what that vulnerability is and the type of harm it can cause in your environment. Now, you also want to know the context of that vulnerability. And let me give you an example of this. If I ask you, what is the risk of a bald tire? What is the risk of a bald tire? When I ask that question to many security professionals, they will say that the risk is high, but it's actually a trick question. If I then tell you that, in fact, the tire is not on my automobile, it's actually in my garden for my children to play on. So the risk is actually very low. And this is an example of the importance of knowing the context of the risk. So the way Tenable describes this is the second pillar of risk-based vulnerability management, which is the asset criticality rating, the ACR. The ACR calculates the criticality of an asset to focus prioritization efforts. This is looking at the business purpose of the asset, the type of device, where it's connected to, what type of capabilities that device has, where is it located in your environments, and what type of data does it have on it? Does it have third-party data on it, or confidential, very sensitive data on it? But understanding what's the criticality and context of that asset in your environment. And once you have those two pillars, those two factors, the VPR, knowledge of the vulnerability, plus knowledge of your asset, the ACR, with machine learning and threat intelligence, this enables you to focus first on what matters the most. You can prioritize based on the importance of the asset and the risk posed by that vulnerability on that asset specifically. So this is really the key to becoming an effective security leader. And in fact, Gartner, one of the, of course, well-known security industry groups, has stated that by 2022, organizations that use the Tenable risk-based vulnerability management method will suffer 80% fewer breaches. So I think this is a very strong and clear case for why to use this Tenable-supported risk-based vulnerability management approach, because you have, as McKinsey said, you can improve your security program almost 8 times at no added cost, and you're probably going to suffer 80% fewer data breaches. So you've got a significant, strong case for why this is the right approach for your security program. Now let's look at the final example and factor that I want to talk about, which is we've talked about the first two keys to success are the ability to see everything, and the second is to be able to or see every asset in your environment, know what you have. The second is to predict what's going to be a critical risk. And the third factor that I'll talk about, the third key, is to act to address that risk. Because you can see and predict everything, but you want to make sure that you're taking effective action to remediate that. And business-aligned security leaders are 6 times more likely to review performance metrics with their business stakeholders than their more siloed, less aligned counterparts. And I want to give you an example of this. Tenable did a study of some customers that were new, looking at how they handled vulnerabilities in their environments. And what we see is a crisis of priority. So this is an example of how some organizations were remediating vulnerabilities overall. This is both critical and non-critical. And this is the same line for highly exploitable vulnerabilities. And I'll go back a second. These are the overall vulnerabilities, and these are critical vulnerabilities being remediated. And what you probably noticed is these lines are almost exactly the same. So this shows that organizations are not prioritizing critical vulnerabilities. So we really have a crisis of how organizations are effectively acting to address the most critical risks in their environment. And I'll give you an example of when I come into a less mature organization that doesn't have an effective security program, I often see that they're using a legacy simple monitoring tool. They scan infrequently. They're not using authenticated scans. They simply report raw findings to the operations team. And it's basically a simple process of analyze the environment, attempt to prioritize. You report maybe some dump of that 60,000 critical or high vulnerabilities. You relax and you repeat the process. But this is not vulnerability management. This is the most basic form of assessment without prioritization. So let me describe to you what I would say is an effective risk-based vulnerability management approach. And it's much more than what I just described. It's starting with the assessment process, but then using the kind of tools that we talked about, the VPR, the ACR, the validation, is this a critical risk? Am I prioritizing it effectively? And do I know the context? Am I using threat intelligence and predictive prioritization to understand the context? Having effective patch management and remediation, having software security assessments through DevOps into production, making sure you're testing, retesting, and have an effective quality assurance process, and that you have metrics. Are you using quantifiable metrics to measure that program, or are you just reporting a RAG score, red, amber, green type heat matrix? So you really want to identify where you're exposed, prioritize effectively, and be able to identify and measure whether you're reducing risk. Because when business leaders ask, how secure are we? They don't want a 300-page answer. And I think following this methodology will help you to effectively communicate. By the way, Tenable also provides a product called Lumen, which in fact was something I looked at closely when I was working at a bank, because it's really that rare product available that helps you to quantify your cyber exposure risk. Lumen pulls together a cyber exposure score that compares your cyber risk internally. You can benchmark internally by business unit or business group, but also enables you to benchmark externally. And it gives you that quantifiable cyber exposure score that really helps a business leader to make a strategic decision based on a quantifiable number. There's also recommended workflows so you can track remediation and really drill down into specific vulnerabilities to identify what are the challenges and effectively remediate. So I just want to close out by mentioning some of the key recommendations to be business aligned. We've talked about the 3 keys, which are to see everything, predict what matters, and act effectively against those risks. But you want to make sure that you are communicating effectively with confidence, that you align your security initiatives with the business, you benchmark internally and externally your performance, prioritize your assessments and automate key processes, develop a comprehensive assessment of your most critical assets and vulnerabilities, and really define quantifiable metrics that show the value of your cybersecurity investment. If you do these simple steps, these 6 steps, you're really going to effectively become a business-aligned security leader. And I'll close out by the last comment I'll make is, where do you begin? You may say, all of this sounds great, but how do I get started? I talk to a lot of organizations that are at that bottom layer there of traditional vulnerability management. It's very people-powered and ad hoc, very compliance-driven. And you're just trying to understand, where are we exposed? And this is a starting point for many organizations. And if you're at this point, I would just encourage you this year to take that first next step to being risk-based vulnerability management driven, powered by machine learning, using the vulnerability priority rating, the VPR and ACR, knowing the context, having a continuous assessment process where you're beyond just where we expose, but you're looking at where should we prioritize based on risk? How do we compare to our peers? And then finally, go to that next level, which many organizations achieve, which is true cyber exposure management, connecting your security program to the business and asking, are we reducing risk over time? How are we measuring and improving our security program? And are we including a holistic analytics beyond just vulnerability management? There's my email address, and I welcome, I think we don't have time right now for Q&A, but I welcome if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn or send me an email, and I would be happy to follow up with you one-to-one. And I'll now turn it over to my colleagues who will continue the discussion, I believe, and you'll learn a little more about how to be an effective security leader. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's been a pleasure to have you, and a big thank you from the entire Tenable India family, and on behalf of everybody watching this live, a big thank you. I know it's difficult to get up at 4 a.m. and a big thank you. I know it's probably still dark outside your window curtain.
Thank you. My pleasure.
But
thank you.
Thank you. Cool. Okay. So that was Adam, a senior colleague of mine, and a wonderful person who's seen. He's been a CISO at a large European bank, and currently he's our cybersecurity strategist. So, when you say a practitioner who's also executing and consulting organizations on what their right cybersecurity policies framework should be. So you heard the guru, and it doesn't stop there. We've got another guru lined up. So can I have my partner in crime, Aftab, also with me on the main stage? Aftab, so what do we have in store now?
Shankar, so the next is all about demystifying the RBI policy. And while I was opening up the stage, we were talking about the same thing. Now, digital payment is a very, very important, I would say digital payment is a very, very important page of a financial book, like if I can call it. Any digital age cannot conclude without, coming towards the digital payment side. A safe, assured, and secure transaction is everybody wants, and that should also be minus fraud or any financial loss. So this topic demystifies the RBI policy around digital payments, and the theme comprises of compliance is not equal to security. So we would like to welcome our speaker, and he'll give us more insight.
So when you saying demystifying, are you saying that that 21-pager master circular that RBI gave out in February, which has mandates from source code protection of third-party UPI apps to cybersecurity guidelines? Are you saying that our next expert can actually tell us what needs to be done in, like they say in summary, in a cheat sheet, what that entire thing is all about?
Yes, Shankar. So it's very difficult to read through everything and understand unless you're an expert about it. Everybody needs it.
Yeah, when I used to appear for my exams, I used to make those farras. So I am so looking forward to this session. So Amol is our next speaker. Can we have him up on the stage while I just share with the audience and welcome him? Okay, so Amol, thank you for joining in, and I know it's a little difficult for all the speakers when I read their profile. But please do give me a minute since you are a special guest. I just want to share with the audience that people, please know that Amol leads the cybersecurity team focused on the financial sector and is based out of the Mumbai office of PricewaterhouseCoopers. He specializes in cybersecurity risk management, and his entire, he consults with clients, large public and private sector banks. And in his career spanning over 10 years at PwC, he has done diverse roles, marquee projects, and even built the sectoral computer emergency response team for the government. So without further ado, Amol, thank you so much once again. Over to you.
No, thanks for that quick introduction, Naftab. By putting a lot of words around the circular, you've kind of made my job a little difficult. But I'll start with a quick view that while we kind of continue to look at the circular from different perspectives, it's important that one keeps in mind the business context of their organization at the fore when looking at this circular, just to make sure that you don't look at this from a compliance perspective, but look at how do you kind of make it gel well from an ops perspective, from an ongoing program perspective within your enterprise. And what I really want to cover today is, firstly, I'll talk about some of the some background around the whole payment context in India. Then I'll jump to how RBI looks at the problem statements, and then we'll kind of look at how entities should kind of delve into some of these issues. So this part is not new, and everybody is kind of fully aware of what's happening from a tech and a digital innovation perspective. But I'll kind of quickly talk through some of the statistics to start with. And if you really look at the top half here, what we're really seeing is there's a considerable growth in terms of digital payments, at least in the last 1.5 years. Just before pandemic and post pandemic, I think it's only grown bigger. And in my view, it will continue to grow for a considerable time, considering that you have new umbrella entities coming for as compete organizations from an NPCI perspective, or some of the other innovations that are happening, whether it's Google Pay, whether it's Phone Pay, whether it's most of these fintechs who kind of um, contributing to a very healthy growth and a very healthy competition in the entire digital payment space. But the key call out, honestly, is with all of this, there have been a lot of transaction failures that kind of do occur today. And since it's a very integrated ecosystem, it's very difficult to point fingers to say, hey, look, that this didn't work well or that didn't work well. I look at it as a complete platform, devoid of who's running which part of the business. But customer is king, and basically the customers intend to do a transaction for whatever reason should not get declined. But transaction failures are here, and those are one of the key concerns from a customer perspective. I think the second customer perspective is grievance redressal as well. A lot of times, putting ownership of who's owning it, whose problem is it, also becomes a nightmarish kind of a thing for some of the entities, and that's again um, I'll say an impediment today to the digital payment growth. And the last is, we've seen a lot of noise around customer data leakage, etc., and we kind of continue to hear even in biggest entities on the social side kind of have these problems. So those are some of the key problems that I see that will continue to kind of haunt the digital payment players. But essential critical is the key messages is, I think the growth momentum will continue. I believe that with new innovations coming in, with the new umbrella entities getting established, we will even find better and easier ways to do payments. But we need to be really mindful of what are the risks that can kind of come back and haunt some of the ecosystem players. So, just moving on to the next slide, I think. And this is my view. If there's anything that somebody wants to comment later as well, they can send in those comments. But the way I see the whole ecosystem in India, and a lot of this is also enabled by, I'll not say a few, but multiple fintechs in today's world. So we have a lot of innovation happening on the channel side. We have a lot of innovation happening on the payment rails. The centerpiece on the instruments. The various instruments that are today possible within the Indian ecosystem are also fairly evolved, and customers have a choice or plethora of options which they can use. But what's really important is what are we doing to secure the payment rails? How are the payment networks gearing up to address some of the evolving risks, and how can our ancillary services really help us mitigate some of these some of the risks that come along with the digital payment. So a few call outs, a few examples that I'll call out is like fraud. Now, predominantly when we talked about fraud in the past, it was more about what happens on a card transaction, what happens on a credit card transaction, or what happens on a debit card transaction. But today the world has moved beyond card, whether debit or credit cards, and it's essential to look at other instruments for frauds as well, because through a very structured fraud management programs that the card entities have been running, or for that matter, most of the entities have been running on the card side of the business. I think there's a good hold on the frauds around cards, but the payment instruments other than cards remain highly under watched, and they also remain as second priority from a sector perspective, and that's where some of these guidelines are kind of coming back, and they may force entities to relook at um, how the whole fraud management program should be run outside of the context of the credit and the debit card business. The second part is there's a um, lot of lot number of transactions which get declined for whatever reasons, and there's a need for speed on the reconciliation side, again where RBI is very keen to look at how we can fasten, how can we kind of enhance the whole program from a reconciliation perspective to kind of do early detection. And the last part which I'll call out on this slide essentially is what's the role of big data in making sure that we are able to look at a more wider number of transactions and kind of create some advanced use cases, analytics around transactions to make sure that we are able to protect the customers from a overall perspective. So key call outs, I think innovation is happening on all pieces. Um, I think with the new umbrella entities and some of the other innovations that are in the pipeline, we will see a much more robust improvement in some of the new technologies which will come in. But I think the underlying risks around fraud, around anti-money laundering, around knowing your customers, around the whole security of these setups is something which is going to be critical from a program perspective. So moving on, I think some of the key risks and even kind of not getting into some of the nitty gritties, uh, the risk mindset really needs to now stick in, because I think the whole purpose of this circular is to kind of make organizations rethink about each and every risk that kind of is relevant from an enterprise perspective. For someone, untrusted apps may be a priority. For example, banks would like to continuously monitor, are there any rogue apps of similar name, similar looking apps that are coming on the store, and how do they kind of kill it. And so is it true for many of the other startups who have mobile or mobility based innovative products that come in. The second part that I'll kind of call out is also around the whole data protection. And now today, with a lot of integrated systems, the number of touch points where the data gets transferred or the data kind of goes through a handshake has gone up manifold. Whether it is an SMS gateway, whether it is your third parties who process some of the authentications, whether it is some of the innovative snappings that you have on your mobile apps. There are multiple touch points which are at risk today, and there's a need to really relook at the whole data life cycle to say how are you going to protect your data going forward. The third piece that I'll call out is fixing the basics. Now, we all talk about security, we all know what security is, but the problem is we still find that the interpretation of what is required by the organization still remains a challenge. Somebody may say that um, we do encryption end to end, but when you really go and look at what they mean is maybe it's just limited to the network encryption, or sometimes it's only limited to some kind of SSL pinning on the product. So focus on the basics to make sure that you first understand, interpret, and make sure that the basics are well thought through and they've kind of implemented across the organization very, very consistently. The fourth piece that I'll call out is authentication. And now everybody knows what is an authorization and authentication. But the problem today is we still believe phishing will remain a big industry outside of the banking industry, if I have to or if I have to say so, which will continue to fish out authentication vectors from customers. And not every customer can be at the uh, same level of understanding from a phishing risk perspective. Now, we really need to think through, we really need to step back and look at what are the different authentication mechanisms that I can bring in within the enterprise to make sure that any potential risks, whether it's from smishing, phishing, wishing, could be addressed just by looking at multiple data points of where somebody is logging in from, what device is logging in from, are the patterns of transactions usual, do you see an out of hour or out of country login. So there's going to be a lot of focus on the whole authentication framework, which needs a continuous focus and evolution in terms of making sure that you kind of continue to fine tune the art from an authentication perspective. On the business resilience, because this space has multiple players, it's up to every individual player to look at what is my role from a resilience perspective and what I need to do to make sure that I am doing everything which will make sure that the systems will run well, and not I will not be the impediment from a resiliency perspective. And the other two things is look at your input validations. People have great tools that have been built, but in my view, most of them do not go through a very well orchestrated user acceptance input validation kind of controls, which I think should be a continued focus from a program perspective. Moving on, these are some of the considerations that RB is kind of called out, and I'll call them as key themes from the circular. But we need to be mindful of one key thing. This is a reflection of the known risks that are on the regulator stable. And what I mean by that, not everything that happens within an enterprise may necessarily have a impact on customers, and hence may not necessarily get reported to RBI. Um, so RBI will always have a limited, distilled view of what are the impeding problems, or what are the current and concurrent issues, either from a customer side or from an enterprise side, that needs to be addressed. And what RBI is really tried to do here is, they've said, okay, we have these 10 themes that are emerging, and can we look at making sure that organizations go and fix those problems so the known issues are well addressed. But what's important to look at is, it's not about what RBI thinks, but it's about how do you look at the enterprise yourself. Don't only look at from what RBI understands and what RBI believes are the key risks. Look at it from your own risk lens to say, how do I look at a transaction life cycle for every instrument or every channel within the whole life cycle, and uh, what are the various risks that can be there in the enterprise beyond what the regulator has asked. And the reason I'm saying that is, since anyways you are looking at the regulatory needs at this time, and you will kind of go through the whole life cycle to say, okay, how does my full life cycle look like, what are the various touch points, what are the data flows that I have. Add a risk lens to the whole program to say, okay, when I am developing a product or doing a new onboarding, what are the key risks that can emerge? What are my fraud risk areas which I have not addressed in the past? What are my reconciliation settlement processes that have not been kind of dwelled well in the past? How do I look at the customer life cycle? How do I board a customer? How do I authenticate him? How do I look at a customer support life cycle and look at everything from a completely new risk lens in the context of your organization, rather than just looking at what the regulator is asking? Then go back to the left side, which is to say that what are the governing principles that you want to bring in, to say, how do I do inclusive governance? How do I create a unified risk dashboards? How do I kind of do ongoing assurance? And then go back to your IT framework to say that what are the missing pieces from a process standardization? What are the missing pieces from a product rationalization? What are the missing pieces from a data protection perspective? What am I really doing from securing the technology perspective? So it's important that you move away, or I'm not saying don't look at the compliance, but look at what are the key themes that look at from an enterprise perspective. Look at the various risks that emerge, and make sure that you kind of addressed the risks beyond what a regulator is saying, to make sure that this opportunity that you've got is kind of used in entirety to make sure this change sticks in the organization, rather than just looking at a compliance lens. One last slide. I know I'm kind of running out of time, but um, just quick measures that you can use. And these are some very high level questions. I can kind of do 2 level, 3 level down below. But look at the framework. Does it cover your important principles? That's very, very important. Look at adoption. Make sure that every business unit has signed up to what framework you've adopted. Don't write a framework just because a regulator wants. That doesn't help. Look at awareness. Now, IT stakeholder will have a different requirement vis-a-vis a business stakeholder, and it's very, very important that you make this change stick through a very well orchestrated training program. Look at automation. Don't look at availability of tools. Look at the efficacy of the systems that you've got in. That's going to kind of make the change stick. Have you looked at your extended ecosystem? Don't look at a problem to say that it is somebody else's problem. Look at the problem to say this is the life cycle of the problem. Now let's look at who owns the problem. So you need to go beyond your brief in terms of what's within your enterprise. Make sure that you know what you measure, and you also know where to measure. Now, I have seen, at least in most of my experiences in the past, I've always found that people have good measurement metrics, but they don't know where to measure, and that's where most of the problems occur. The last bit is how do you embed learnings in your program, because that's going to be important. Let's not wait for the next regulatory circular to kind of fix it. And what's your ongoing improvement plan? With that, I think I kind of close my session. But if there are any questions, please feel to write back to me. My details are in the presentation. Those will be kind of there for everyone to look at. And one last thing, everything that I spoke on this presentation are my personal views and not necessarily of the firm. So please don't quote PwC, but you can kindly quote me, as that is my view, both from a concept as well as from a consideration perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Amol. It was a wonderful session, and Amol, if you allow, there are some questions. I know we are short of time, but can I just? There are two questions that have come up, which are fairly similar. So, if you allow me a minute, I'll just read those two questions.
Sure.
So first question and the second question is more or less same. They're saying, can organizations save their financial data outside the country? And a similar one is, can an NBFC store their data outside the country? Any perspectives on that?
So, quick perspective, I think from a regulatory perspective, make sure that what financial data are we talking about? Because financial data has many contours. But predominantly, if you look at it, what RBI is stressing on is the payment data that needs to be localized. I've not at least come across any specific regulation which says financial data cannot be outside of India. But considering that the regulator does periodic checks or periodic reviews, it will be good to have that available in the India geography as a second copy at a minimum. And the second is in the context of the impending PDP bill, some you may want to wait a little while more before making decisions of taking data out, because it specifically calls out for certain financial data to be not stored out of India. So while the regulator may not ask, the rule of land may force you to rethink the strategies around data localization. So those could be my two quick comments on this.
Thank you, Amol. And couple of comments where people have appreciated your presentation. So thank you on their behalf. Thank you from the entire team at Tenable, Amol. We truly appreciate you taking out time and look forward to our continued association. Thank you once again, Amol.
No, my pleasure. And last 2 seconds, thank you, Tenable. That should have come first, but obviously in the heat of things of 20 minutes, I kind of rushed through. But thanks, Shankar. Thanks to the entire Tenable team for having me here, and it was pleasure being here. Thank you so much, and all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Amol.
Thanks.
Okay. Team, can I have my partner in crime, Aftab Bhai, back on stage? It's always good to have somebody along with you managing the show like they do at Filmfare Awards. It's never one person; it's generally two people. Obviously, we're not as funny as generally the MCs are, but whatever little we could do to spice up things, make it more interesting. Oh wow! So I'm not sure if it's deliberate and Aftab is not coming on stage, but okay, no worries. So, oh wow,
Hi, I'm back.
Do you have a face?
Yeah, apparently Aftab wasn't happy with the comment, so he said, "Suneet, you go ahead."
good to have you, Suneet. So,
I think the show is running really fine, and from the queries we have received from the audience, I think audience is really appreciating the content that you guys have brought together. So congratulations on that. Plus, it's a shout out to the audience that we are halfway through. We have 1 more hour to go, a little less than 1 more hour. So please keep sharing your questions with us. We have at least 2 more sessions ahead of us. followed by, and yes, in between we will have some commandery going on between Shankar and Aftab if he agrees to come back, hopefully. But otherwise, yeah. So I'm here. So
and guys, Sunit is also interesting. Just that he's probably tied up, so he doesn't look that. He's got an amazing sense of humor. So pardon him. He's got the entire show that he's running. So otherwise, Sunit is as interesting as Aftab, and I could have loved to, involve him in my next session, but we let him go. He's got lots of other things. But Sunit, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, and the entire team at DSCI. The show is thanks to all of you. And to all my fellow attendees, if in case the presentation is not coming on live, please do a refresh and join back. The platform could be a bandwidth issue. We've got a good number of attendees, and I know there are some comments on the chat where the presentation for a speaker is not coming in. Request all of you to just press the refresh button. At times, it could be a small little glitch. But okay, without further ado, can we please have my senior colleague right from California join in? Can we get Jeff on the stage, please? And while Jeff is coming over, let me just tell you that as promised, we've got some best of speakers lined up, and Jeff is somebody who is an expert again in the cybersecurity space. To build a small little, oh my God, look who's here!
Somebody was holding my hand, Shankar, not allowing me to come to you.
We were missing you, Aftab bhai, and we had so Aftab. Before I break the interesting part, what is Jeff going to talk about? We've had too many interesting sessions.
This session is going to be very, very interesting for all those who know a word called Nessus Pro, that is Nessus Professional. Sometimes, Shankar, the brand, supersedes the name of a company, and people recall brand more than a company quickly. If you remember, in our young days, while I'm not old enough, but people used to say that, I have to go and get surf from the market. And the guy who comes back is not holding a surf, it's another detergent powder. But in that line, the surf as a brand became so famous that everybody used to call any, detergent like surf. So similarly, what we have heard is that I was in a meeting with customer, and customer says that there are some team down at the reception who has come from Nessus. Now, which means they meant actually Tenable, but then because the Nessus is so proudly, profoundly called in the industry, it becomes so much of convenient and intertwined word. So here, if you see Nessus Pro or Tenable, it's like organization or product. It's an intertwined word, and often heard Tenable being called fondly as Nessus. Nessus Professional is Tenable's one of those favorite product, which is being loved by security industry since ages. Now, with risk growing more and more around us, Shankar, there was a need for knowing where to focus, how easily to communicate those security posture, which any leader would wanted to, and not running into kind of, n number of pages on Excel sheet. Hence, looking at that need, we built a Tenable enterprise product, and industry has already started taking advantage of that Tenable enterprise product. Now, this session would highlight those top 5 reasons from why to upgrade from Nessus Pro to Tenable enterprise product, and this session is all about.
Perfect. So while Jeff would just refresh his browser so that we quickly check his mic and video, why don't I share an interesting tidbit. So now, not sure if it's still true, but I remember back in my MBA days, there was a quick quiz questions, and like the way Nessus and Tenable, how many of us actually know that Subway is actually a brand and the parent company is Dr. Associates? So I can actually relate to when you're saying that Nessus and Tenable. Tenable is the creator of Nessus, and while most of the organizations, hello Jeff, good to have you.
Hey, how are you? Thank you.
Thank you. Are you still on your Tuesday, Jeff, or are you on Wednesday like us?
I'm still on my Tuesday.
Thank you. That was just to rub it in. So
We are bringing you from past, Jeff.
yeah, blast from the past.
Yes.
We getting okay. Team, thank you, Jeff. And I know the idea is not to embarrass you, but since you've got an amazing profile, I have to take a minute and share with the audience a couple of paras from your profile. So, people, happy to share that Jeff has been in the security industry for more than 18 years, working for some of the best known companies in the industry. Jeff has experience up and down the security stack, from client side scanning and perimeter security solutions to encryption technologies. At Tenable, Jeff runs the security solutions team. He works with technical and research teams to understand the pros and cons of the wide range of vulnerability risk management methods utilized in organizations across sizes, across sectors. And then the best part is he would analyze that information and give guidance to organizations, to SecOps, IT teams, to ensure that when they run those solutions in their enterprises, they get spot on results. So, Jeff, let me not steal the thunder. The stage is all yours. Aftab and Shankar would go off the stage. Happy Tuesday.
Great, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for having me. What I really wanted to do is go ahead and discuss with everybody the reasons why you would want to upgrade from your Nessus Pro or your Nessus Professional license to the Tenable platform. And don't get me wrong, Nessus Professional is Tenable's flagship product. We love it. It's a fantastic scanner. But at the end of the day, it is vulnerability assessment. It is just a scanner. It doesn't do anything beyond that. So upgrading to the full platform is going to give you an abundance of new capabilities and move from vulnerability assessment to really proactive, efficient, effective vulnerability management. And I'll explain these 5 reasons now. So one of the reasons why, and this isn't not even in a specific order, but one of the reasons why you need to consider moving from Nessus Pro to the Tenable platform is you need to modernize your security program. Now, if you're still using a legacy scanner such as Nessus, you have a growing number of vulnerabilities that's just adding all the time, just every day, every week, every month. And you can't get ahead of them. You're just getting buried in them. So you don't have any context to understand one from the other. You just have this kind of flat ASCII list, if you will, of those vulnerabilities. And there's nothing else to go on. So what the Tenable platform is going to do is it's going to add context and color to each of those vulnerabilities. So now you can proactively manage them so that you can actually reduce the greatest amount of risk with the least amount of effort, because you can actually prioritize the specific vulnerabilities that matter most to your organization. And let me kind of explain to you a little bit of what the problem is today that you're facing. First of all, as I mentioned before, you have way too many vulnerabilities, way more than your team can possibly handle. And it doesn't matter if you're a small company or a large company or anywhere in between. The fact is you will never have the number of essentially the financial tools, the financial capabilities, or the people to effectively manage all the vulnerabilities you have in your environment. So you have to be able to narrow those down. But unfortunately, that list is growing. And as I mentioned before, no context, no additional guidance whatsoever. You don't have any idea what one means versus the other. And that's because you're really relying exclusively on CVSS. And what I really mean by that is CVSS base scores in order to prioritize. And I'll explain the CVSS versus CVSS base scores in a little bit. but you're relying exclusively on that in order to prioritize which vulnerabilities to work on first. Now, I've got a couple of numbers here that I really want to highlight in order to put this in perspective. So first of all, last year, we saw more than 18,000 brand new vulnerabilities, brand new CVEs. And I think that the exact number was like 18,313, something like that, but it was somewhere north of 18,000. Now, if we look back just 4 years ago, it was just a little over 6,000. I think it was about 6,500. So this is nearly a 3x increase in what we just saw 4 years ago. So it's a huge amount and a growing number of vulnerabilities that we need to deal with. And now, if you kind of put your eyes down at the bottom left, you'll also notice that approaching 60% of all of those vulnerabilities, of all those CVEs, have a base score of 7 or above. So that means if you are one of those organizations, like many, who are really looking at trying to remediate all the vulnerabilities that are considered high or critical, therefore 7 or above or 7 plus, it means that 57% of those fall in that realm. So you're really not reducing that 18,000 by very much. You still have way too many to handle. Now, if you're a bank, you probably have to even remediate even more than that. And I don't know about India, but in the US, many of our banks have to actually remediate all of those vulnerabilities that have a CVSS base score of 4 and above. So that 57% grows even bigger. It's more than 80% actually have a 4 or above score. So coming up to the top right, if you have let's just take 7 plus, for example, as your strategy, only 24% of all of those vulnerabilities rated 7 and above have an exploit publicly available against them, which means that if you try to fix every single one of those, you're actually wasting 76% of your time, effort, and energy, because that 76% that doesn't even have an exploit against it poses little to no risk, and certainly no immediate risk. So you can, at minimum, you can put that off to a different day, deprioritize, and prioritize other vulnerabilities that actually pose real risk. Now, taking that the next step further, if you were to take the entire risk gamut, so CVSS base scores from 0 all the way to 10.0, 44% actually have public exploits against them. So that means that if you're taking a 7 and above score, and I'm sorry, I misspoke there, the 44% is 0 to 6.9. So it means if you're taking a 7 and above, you are categorically and by policy ignoring anything that falls 6.9 or below, which means that you're leaving 44% of what is considered the riskiest vulnerabilities in your environment as you go and work on these 7 and above. Now, think about that. Think about the fact that you're leaving this risk in your environment while you're wasting time on the other end. And then in general, only 20% of vulnerabilities across the board actually have public exploits available. So I know there's a lot of numbers to throw at you, but it's just a lot of different things to consider when you're thinking about why CVSS really isn't the right way to go anymore. Now, that was all reason number 1, and we said a lot. Now, reason number 2, you need to see your entire attack surface. Now, most companies who have an immature security, vulnerability assessment program are really looking at specifically trying to gain and maintain some degree of risk assessment, and they're trying to make sure that that they maintain their compliance. And as a result, they're really only looking at only those very specific assets that fall within compliance. And traditionally, those are your traditional on-premises physical IT assets. So they're only looking at those. Well, what about all that dynamic attack surface that you've got? What about all those other environments that you've added over the years? So the Tenable platform is actually capable of seeing all of your environments. Everything from that traditional IT asset environment to your cloud environments, to your OT environments, to your web apps, to your containerized environments. All of those pieces all together, all in a unified view. So that's super important, because otherwise, what problems do you have? Well, you're limited to that traditional on-premises environment. You can only see the assets and the vulnerabilities that are there. And you're also limited to these static point-in-time scans, because that's all necessary, or any vulnerability assessment tool is going to do, is you scan once, you've got the data, and then it doesn't refresh until you physically go scan again. So any new assets that have come about since that last scan are completely unknown to you until you do your next scan. So think about those types of things. And of course, as I mentioned before, passing audits, that's really what a lot of our immature security programs are focused on. Now, think about what that really means. Because as I mentioned before, we have a lot of new environments. And in fact, the most dynamic environments throughout our attack surface are completely unrepresented if you're just looking at using a traditional vulnerability assessment tool. So at the bottom of this funnel here, we have our IT tools. Here's our very traditional IT assets, physical, on-prem. We know those, we assess those regularly. But what about OT or even IoT environments, cloud environments, container environments, our web apps? You can rest assured that your adversaries are scanning all of these. So if you're only scanning the traditional on-prem IT environment, you are missing a whole major and probably the most dynamic aspects of your attack surface, and missing all the vulnerabilities that are present there, while your adversaries are seeing everything. And that leaves you extremely vulnerable. Reason number 3, you need to predict risk based on full context. Now, I kind of alluded to this earlier, where CVSS, base score only, it's risk unaware. All it's actually looking at is one aspect of a vulnerability, and that's exploitability. What the Tenable platform is going to do, though, is it's going to bring in, and I know Adam mentioned VPR earlier, the vulnerability priority rating. One of the other components is the asset criticality rating, which is very specific to your business. What assets are important to you specifically, based on how you're using them, based on the data that's present on them, etc. So taking that vulnerability priority rating and the asset criticality rating all into account, now you got a ton of data. So now you're going to need to really utilize machine learning automation in order to really parse through all that data. Luckily, the Tenable platform utilizes all of that, which I'll get into a bit later in the presentation. Now, if you're only considering the CVSS base score, as I mentioned, you don't have any context whatsoever. It's just flat ASCII data. Means you're also limited to a really theoretical view of risk, because all it's looking at is exploitability, as I mentioned a moment ago. And it's also a static methodology for scoring, which means that usually within 2 weeks of a new CVE being discovered, it gets assigned a CVSS base score. Once it's assigned that CVSS base score, it never changes. No matter what's going on in the environment, no matter what happens in our world, no matter what happens to your network, that base score stays the same. So now we're talking about something that is incapable of changing with our world. So that's a huge problem for us, because if you're using that, it's not dynamic by any stretch of the imagination, but you're using it to assess a very dynamic environment. Now, this is kind of what I was mentioning before. On the far left here, we have the base metric group. Essentially, it's looking at exploitability. There are also temporal and environmental metric groups that are kind of inherent in the larger CVSS score. But the problem is that the temporal and environmental are not particularly useful. They are rife with errors. They lead to a whole bunch of false positives. So as a result, I don't know anybody who actually uses them. So because they're so rife with errors, everybody just uses the base score. Well, the base score, of course, has its own problems, as I've mentioned several times. The other piece, as I mentioned just a moment ago, is it's a completely static score. So this is just an example. This is a bit old of an example. It's about 1.5 years old now. But this is using the Sodin ransomware. And you'll notice over about an 8-month period, score goes up and down. This is the Tenable score that you see up on the right, up on the top. This is our vulnerability priority rating, or VPR. And you'll notice it goes up and down as things change in the world. The bottom two lines are CVSS v3 and CVSS v2. You'll notice that both of them, no matter what their score was when they were assigned, straight line, they never change. So again, that's a problem for you, because it may not have been seen as a threat in terms of exploitability, but later, now you have hundreds of exploits written against it, it still doesn't change. So now you have issues. But the score doesn't change, so it's never going to tell you that. Now, reason number 4, you need to be able to be very confident in your choices and very rapid pace. Now, as I mentioned before, machine learning automation is super critical to all that. And the Tenable platform uses something we call exposure AI. And that's simply a kind of a brand name or a marketing name for our machine learning and our data science that really analyzes more than 20 trillion pieces of data of security intelligence continuously. And that includes, and kind of looking at the banners here, more than 20 million aspects of threat data, more than 10 threat providers that are actually included in that, and 55,000 vulnerabilities that we track and prioritize every single night. And that's just part of these 20 trillion aspects. So this is context. This is not a base score. This is not just looking at exploitability. This is looking at the world, and it's updated every single night. We're constantly analyzing it, and we update it in your environment every single night within the platform. So you wake up first thing tomorrow morning, and you have a brand new score for that vulnerability based on what happened in the prior 24 hours. That's really critical, because if you're not doing that, well, you have either really, really time-consuming manual analyses, or you're flying blind. Both of them are problems. You don't have any contextual data. You're just using those static scores that we've been talking about. You don't have any of that understanding of any of the key aspects of vulnerabilities. And you certainly don't have enough information to act with any degree of confidence. If your manager asks you, hey, why did you make that decision versus another? How can you really confidently answer if you don't have any of that is essential data and that essential context in order to understand what's going on? And it's really because really vulnerabilities aren't created alike. So this just kind of gives a kind of a quick assessment of what Tenable is looking at. We actually look at 150 different aspects of every single vulnerability. This is what goes into our vulnerability priority rating, or VPR. So every single night, well, constantly we're doing this, and then every single night we update the vulnerability priority rating based on this. And fifth, certainly last but certainly not least, you need to be able to measure using clear success metrics. KPIs, super important. If you don't have KPIs, or if you can't measure based on KPIs, you're probably just assessing your capabilities based on the number of patches that you apply every month. And that is a kind of useless information if you think about it. It doesn't matter if you applied 500 patches, if you applied 500 patches to the wrong vulnerabilities that didn't matter, vulnerabilities that didn't pose any threat, any risk. So what you really need to do is you really need to base your KPIs based on reducing risk. You need to make sure that you understand what is risky, what is not, so you can focus and really have that laser focus on what's most important. And again, if you're not doing that, you're just focusing on the number of patches deployed. Again, I don't want to offend anybody. That's kind of useless information because you're not accounting for that risk. And you can't truly determine the efficiency and the effectiveness of your team. So with all of that said, I want to go ahead and open it up to questions. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for that wonderful deck, and I'm still having guilt pangs that you're still living in your Tuesday, and we had to request you to present. But thank you once again from everybody here in India on our Wednesday. Thank you, and hope you have a good sleep, good night, and catch you on your Wednesday.
Great, thank you. And I hope to do this in person next time.
We would love to host you in India, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
You're not on. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Aftab bhai. So now what do we have in store?
Well, we have heard a good amount of interesting topic, Shankar, and it's time that whatever we spoke, we see it on live somewhere. So we have a live demo session presented by our colleague called Zishan Patel, and he is one of our tech leaders who's well known in banking and financial sector and works very, very closely with us. Most of the audience would definitely recognize him by his face and voice. He would give us a good idea about how does the product flow goes, and a brief idea on demonstrating the important and key variables and aspects of Tenable enterprise product portfolio. So I would say let's start that because that's going to be very interesting and intriguing.
Perfect. So are you saying all the things, when we do a proof of concept at a customer's premising, can we actually see it live up on the stage here on this platform?
That's right, Shankar. So when we go and engage customers really want to see the product running actually in front of them, and presentations at times becomes boring. So we prefer to show them on a demo, and they can see the product going live, how it runs, what kind of dashboard comes forward, and interesting components which can give them a very good insight about it.
Oh, this is music to the ear. Yeah, this is like, and for me, who's a marketer, this is so cool because then I'm sure I'll get lots of leads right here. Thank you,
Absolutely.
thank you, Aftab. Can we have Zishan up on the stage? We'll hear some music while Zishan is climbing the stairs. The curtain is moving, and Zishan, thank you.
Thanks, Shankar.
Yes, Zishan.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful introduction and making me hear the music as I was climbing.
We climb down now. We climb down. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Let me share the screen. Thank you. So everybody can see the screen. So I would just start from where Jeff pointed out that the difference between what is the advantages of having an enterprise level product. So I just want to reiterate it that when we talk about Nessus Pro, and when Aftab also spoke, that the brand becomes the most value than what we have to offer, I still feel Nessus Pro becomes more like a vulnerability assessment solution, and the climb up that what we need to see is on the how we manage our vulnerabilities. So the first and the foremost thing that what we come across as we log on to our management console is the dashboard. So every CISO or every CIO wants to know that what's happening around their organization, and the first and foremost thing that what they can look around is the beautiful dashboard that would come around and give them an executive summary of where they lie upon. Uh, it would give you everything. It would let you know that what are the vulnerabilities that they have uh, detected, they have discovered over a period of time, and what is the trend analysis that is going across on that particular front. If they want to go more deeper and find across what are the outstanding patches that they have on their operating system like Windows, CentOS, we can do the fabrication or we can do the segregation that is required, and it will also let you know what is the score that it gives you around. Also, the most important part that when a CISO wants to know, okay, if there is a vulnerability, what is the age of that vulnerability? Is it been there within my organization since a very long period of time or a less period of time? So we also give you the age of that vulnerability. The age of the vulnerability can be determined in two ways: from the time it was discovered by the regulatories or by the time that you have discovered in your organization. Most of the customers, most of the organizations want to know when it was discovered within my premise. That is very important, and that is where that battle, or I would say the difference, can be resolved between the CISO team and the operation team, where the CISO team discovers and asks the operation teams to do the patching. Then there is a good proof that when it was discovered, when it was patched, can be taken care, and that is where your patch lifecycle can also get controlled with respect to these two departments that who are working together to get the risk posture as low as can be possible. The most important factor that I want to also highlight upon is on the assets front. As Jeff mentioned, that we want to know that what are the assets that what we have. Because before going into a scan process, we also need to have a visibility that where our asset lies. Because if you don't know what assets we are using, then it becomes very difficult to chase down the vulnerabilities on each of the assets, because you never know that which asset might get compromised, which asset could be an IOC, and that is where the vulnerability can peep in into your network, and that is where we give you a complete uh, visibility on what assets do you have. And when Jeff was trying to give you the converge attack surface, so we can discover from the legacy systems like the desktops, laptops, but not only we are restricting ourselves to that, but network devices, any devices that you have hosted on cloud, we can discover it. And the best part is, like, if you just add a template, you can see that you can have multiple templates according to it. You can just put across like how you use a template in a NAC kind of a capability, that okay, if my antivirus is updated, then I want to know that whether that what that asset is. So you can run a template as per that. If you want to have it based on your operating system, then we have templates on the same as well. We can put Windows and we can say, okay, machines which are having Microsoft Office or Adobe applications, machines which are having Internet Explorers, you can define the parameter for those particular discoveries and get it. Similarly, is for Linux. So if there are Linux, or I would say Unix platforms, we can have that particular part as well. So that is one of the things that what we can put across. Second part that comes around is on the dynamic applications or dynamic assets. There are a lot of questions that come around from my customers that will you be able to look around for static IPs are fine because we know the IP is static here. But what about DHCP? But we also discover uh, assets which are having DHCP access. So how do we do that? So we normally give a there's an internal algorithm which works, and we give a UUID. So we call that as unique identification number to that particular asset, so that whether it is a DHCP IP or it is a static IP, we are able to discover those assets and give you the results of what that asset contains of. So this is the most important thing that we wanted to show across. Second is obviously the analysis part, that what we drill upon. Since Jeff also spoke, what is the another advantage as we move from an assessment tool to a management tool? We want to have a look on the prioritization. So when we talk about prioritization, what is that we will look on that particular front? And that is where he said about the VPR, which was the vulnerability priority rating access that he was talking about. And this is the dashboard which gives us a clear indicator of what is the advantage. The first indicator that what we give to our customers is on the remediation summary, that how much, which particular vulnerability, if you resolve it or if you patch it, will reduce the risk reduction. What is the percentage of risk reduction it will do at your organization level? So this is the most important part, because it gives you which is the vulnerability which you need to patch, how much is the risk reduction, and how many hosts it can take cover upon. So that is the most beautiful part about this particular prioritization, that what we talk upon. And then
Zishan bhai,
yeah,
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If we were to request you that we just have couple of more minutes,
oh,
because we've got an industry CISO who is a surprise to the audience, and we definitely want to have
want
some
to,
time with him.
oh yeah, surely I'll do that. So I'll just try to finish ASAP on this front. Please give me 5 minutes, because I wasn't aware about this.
You have 2 minutes. Sorry, not five, but 2 minutes. Okay, sorry for that. Sorry for
No,
that,
no
Zishan.
worries, no worries. So I'll take that up.
Sure.
Yeah. So the priority part is the most important front, because that is where we want to show across what is the value that what we give you. Because as Jeff also pointed out, that the high and the medium vulnerabilities, or higher the critical ones, by the CVSS puts a lot of emphasis. But what about those vulnerabilities which might be uh, not required to have a patch at that very moment, but you want to focus upon which vulnerabilities you need to patch at that very moment? And if you look across this CVSS map, I come across the reduction of vulnerabilities and the prioritization that I do, that only 6 vulnerabilities can minimize my risk posture by a ton. This is what is the beauty of this particular product, that what we wanted to highlight upon. Since Shankar has not given me much time, but I'll still want to emphasize this again. The second good part, or the second engine that what we have introduced in Tenable, is on the asset exposure. So we also let you know not only which vulnerability score is higher or lower, but also let you know that the assets that what we discovered are where they are, which asset is at higher risk, which assets are at minimum risk or at lower risk. This is where it gives you a complete knowledge of where you need to focus upon, which assets you need to quarantine if they are at a very high risk, so that you can patch them up and then bring into your network, so that the risk can be lowered as much as we can. And last but not the least, we also give you a measure of across what is the cyber exposure score on the calculations of the vulnerabilities that you discovered, on the calculations of the uh, assets that what you have. We can come across on the cyber exposure score and give you a kind of a peer-to-peer comparison on where you lie, what you need to make sure that you are better on your risk exposure score, and how you can reduce your risk. So if you look here, we also let you know that how much is the risk score that if you can be reduced if you follow the recommended actions. So Tenable just does not give you a vulnerability list. It helps you to prioritize your vulnerabilities. It helps you to determine what are the assets that you have within your organization. Depending on that assets, which assets are at maximum risk or lower risk, and on that, how you can also reduce your risk. That is the most important step that what we point across. So our Tenable cycle of discovering, assessing it, remediating it, prioritizing it, and then measuring and giving you a measure of where your organization stand. This is what we want to complete the whole cycle with, and that is what we want to deliver. Thank you so much for patient listening. Over to you, Shankar Bhai.
Thank you, Zishan. And sorry to steal your time a bit.
No worries, Aftab Bhai.
This is not new to us, because most of the time when we go together to customer, he tells me that instead of 30 minutes, we have 15 minutes. So all these surprises are known to us.
I hope I covered what was required. So
yes.
Thank you very much.
And good thing is that I can see some interest coming forward and questions coming forward for you. So once we are off, they'll connect with us and we'll answer.
Definitely, we look forward for that.
Thanks a lot, Zishan, and appreciate your time and gesture on this entire presentation. Now, so we are expecting a new guest, and of course, a very, very important and known face in the industry. So let me, welcome him. Please put our guest on stage, and we will just then introduce and have a small chit chat and understand. I would definitely like to become a CNN reporter and have a small candid chat or candid discussion with them. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Aftab.
How are you doing?
Fine.
Very well. Nice to have you here. And for most of the team, most of the audience, people know this face very well. He has been all the while in most of the important and good platform as speaker. And he's a favorite one who has been called always for speaking on stage. We also thought that let's steal his bit of time and have some small candid chat, give some very informal discussion, not a very formal one, so that people are relaxed, because most of the time it becomes a very formal across the platform, the podium, and talking around it. So let me introduce who doesn't know Mr. Manoj Srivastava. Is a Chief Information Security Officer at Future Generali India Insurance Company Limited. Manoj has been a very, very active industry speaker on prestigious platforms and a good mentor and guide for most of us. A very, very sweet person you can approach. He'll be happy to give you a time and give ear to hear. I don't know whether some of you know, but I have taken this input from his social profile. He has some awards to his cap, like Cyber Sentinel Award 2020, COVID-19 Superhero CISO. I would like to hear about it at the end of the session, definitely something around this. And of course, he is one of those top 100 CISO awardees also. So, Manoj, we wanted to hear some inputs or some guide or some key from your side. You being a CISO, most of the times have been really tough for a CISO job. Many people feel that it's a plus job. People come on in the office and there are some 10 people reporting, and most of the things are going very smooth. In the opening session, I had mentioned that cybersecurity risk management is like protecting a rose petal from the bushes of thorn. So it's something like that. It's very, very risky and sensitive area. So we would like to hear that. What are your 2 recommendations to the industry colleague or security leaders in maintaining a healthy security posture of a financial organization? If you can just give us some idea about you, give us your thought. We would definitely like to hear about it.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Aftab, for the platform. So whatever I learned from industry only, and I just want to share my thought process and my skill set with industry only. If you talk about 2 recommendations, that the number 2 is very less. However, I'll share some different view. Like, the first recommendation is to see the risk posture of organization from reputation risk and financial risk point of view. So reputation risk means overall customer experience should not be compromised. It should not be compromised in terms of efficiency, operations, and their privacy and security also is a part of their experience, and that should also be part of our consideration while we are offering something to customer. So since we have a unity of customer, and experience means security and security and the performance also. So here comes a very collaborative role of CIO and CISO. The first recommendation is IT team and risk team should work together in collaborative approach to ensure that the current infrastructure is being transformed to desired state with operational efficiency and meeting business strategies to minimize overall risk posture. That is my first recommendation. So there are a lot of technicalities. If you want, I can go later on also. And my second recommendation is to have appropriate amount of cyber liability insurance covered to ensure the financial risk to organization is mitigated to some degree, significant degree. And there is only truth. I follow three golden rule of security. I was not safe, I am not safe, and I will never be safe.
Wow.
So irrespective of whatever controls we have, administrative and technical control, at any moment of time something goes wrong. So the most important thing and second recommendation is how soon we can recover, how resilient we are. So these two things are, very, very important, to adapt for every industry and organization.
Very well said, sir. I absolutely like this was, am, and never be, because that is probably the reason why this situation is keeping every CISO on his toes, because he knows that it's not always that you lock the door and nobody is going to come forward. There is something which is happening, and the very, very valid point which you made. Let me put forward another question which will open up some more interesting views from your side. With the attack surface becoming so vast, which means today, if you look from the earlier piece, the subject to secure were very small or very focused, more from servers and networking. But now it's a digital era. It's moving around anywhere and everywhere. And every now and then you hear a new technology coming into play. And you as a CISO, it becomes your duty also to manage which is the new one, whether it should come in, which should not come in, and if it comes, how are you going to secure it? So with this, such a large attack surface becoming so vast, most of the workforce becoming remote because of this COVID, of course. So, is there 2 or 3 priorities that you would want to highlight in the area that you are trying to focus more to help this current situation?
So, from top view, I can say the identity and privacy. These two things are going to play very important role. Irrespective of the infrastructure or applications we have. The SaaS, zero trust. Moving to cloud rather. Hyper cloud, multi-cloud environment. The things are being boundaryless. So protecting identity, rather digital identity and privacy, these two things are going to play very important role. So the first thing is to ensure appropriate level of encryption of data in rest and data in transit. That is very important. And secondly, whatever infrastructure we have, there should be some automated way, because the threat service is very dynamic. We can't have a VAPT calendar and once in a year, so that is not going to save us anymore. There has to be some automation, continuously automatic, the assessment of my infrastructure, my applications, having controls and compensatory controls as failover for those things, and up to certain extent the remedial action should also be automated. Why I'm saying, because I faced a lot of issue. I think my colleagues and industry, they must have faced several issues. Some reports or some new requests are coming to me, we are sending to vendor, they are performing VA, they are sharing report, then report readout session, and then mitigation, then guide team to mitigate, again revalidation, then again something are open. In between entire the supply chain, if a single mail is missed by me, suppose, or my team, as human mistake or due to some technical error, then everything is collapsed, and then it will become ball game. No, it was not my mistake, it was not your mistake. And especially looking into the recent amendments in cybersecurity guideline by IRDA, that irrespective of severity of the vulnerability, For critical application, it has to be closed and revalidated within 30 days, and for rest within 60 days. So it is not no more, endless game. So there has to be some automation. For certain extent, if SSL is not there, TLS 1.2, so these things should be automated for remediation also. That is very important, so that we can have good sleep at night. And a second thing, I think this is no more operational or technology. Earlier it was, people, process, and technology. But now I say there are four pillars: people, process, technology, and psychology.
Oh,
Because, see, if you talk about phishing things, okay, whatever controls we have, we cannot, protect. And this is truth. And the soon we realize it, the sooner we will be in safer place. So bringing security in the culture of organization is very important. Everyone should, from top to bottom should understand what is true, what is truth. That is very important. Why I'm saying psychology, because most of the frauds you must have sent that 175 crore of Paytm KYC fraud for common man within Maharashtra in last 3-4 months. And this is reported number. I don't know how much is unreported. Sharing OTP and all. So these things are purely psychological, and we learn from our administration. So being one step ahead from attacker, that is very important. So I also suggest to have proper red teaming, proper ransomware assessment by some third party, independent party. So that is, very important.
very well. These are I like that psychology piece. I will put it in my discussion when I'm doing it. It's an important one. But thank you so much. One last question, and then we'll try and conclude. But I have another one, interesting one, which I should be maybe asking before the last question comes. What is this COVID-19 superhero CISO word?
Well, so suddenly we went into completely work from home environment. We had very limited infrastructure, very limited budget. So what I did, I kicked off my BCP. I initiated my, because according to IRDA, I'm owner of my BCP also.
Right.
So I started talking somewhere around first week of Feb within my organization, and by second week of Feb, my manager also got convinced. And by latter second week or early third week of Feb, our leadership team were fully convinced that whatever I am proposing is correct one. Immediately we, proposed our transformation plan and had, good discussion with OEM. And one very important thing, to have very frequent discussion with OEM, because, in the industry, see, it's a journey, knowledge, and everyone should see, one can have master of all, jack of all, not master of all. So proper discussion with OEM will guide how to invest wisely. And wisely investment will save at least 30 to 40% of cost reduction in your security budget. So we got all the budgets approved, and before Janata curfew, we were completely working from home.
Wow, very nice.
So that was one of the achievement within my organization. So that's how I know a lot of things to be transformed, and we are working on it in phase-wise manner. I have 3 years roadmap, and slowly we are working on it to meet some desired state.
Very well, sir. So I had my third question, but I chose to pick this up one as third question because I found it very, very interesting. While we do hear more when we meet, we will discuss more about it. So before Shankar pops up on stage, I wanted to ask a last question, which is, there is a massive vulnerability overload problem, and how would you prioritize the vulnerability to focus on that first?
So
if you can just brief us on that.
It is not a matter of prioritization. We don't have choice. We have to address it, irrespective of severity. So the right solution is to having some kind of automation, like you were saying, some enterprise edition of Mesos,
Right.
to have kind of automated solution, not only for fault finding. I'm saying fault finding because this is how app and IT team consider the observations. It should not be only fault finding, but also helping in remediation.
True.
and having right and live state of the health of the infrastructure. So that should also in my roadmap also, and that should be in roadmap of all the industries.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you giving us those inputs. While we'll meet and discuss our more points over a cup of coffee next time, I want to give it back to Shankar to speak on this.
Thank you, Manoj sir. Thank you, and a special thanks because I know you had a call that you had to reschedule. So truly appreciate that, and it was a wonderful session. I like the way Aftab spoke less and gave you more opportunity because knowing him, he generally prefers to talk more. But thank you, Aftab, and thank you, Manoj sir. It was a pleasure to have you. And before I forget, Suneet, Steve, all the folks at backstage. And to all of you audience, a big thank you from the entire team Tenable India and team DSCI. A big thank you for giving us the opportunity to share this 2 hours with you. And I hope all the content, everything that we put together was worthwhile and insightful. Just in case there is any information that you would want us to ask us, Aftab is a.sayyed@tenable.com. I am ssareen@tenable.com. A big thank you again. Suneet, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shankar. Thank you, Aftab, and thank you, Mr. Manoj, and all the other guest speakers. So this was really wonderful session based on the questions that we have received from the audience. So without wasting much time, I would like to request each and every member in the audience to head towards auditorium where Ms. Rama is giving her inauguration session. So we are getting started there. Thank you so much for this wonderful experience.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.